Hello everybody and happy Waffle Party Friday. It's Miscellaneous Gab and we're here to talk about episode 6 of Severance, and boy do we have a lot to talk about. The latest in my time dilation theory, Bert's treacherous past, pregnancy rumors, Mark's reintegration, and so much more. But before we get started, I want to say thank you to everyone who has come to support my channel. In order to show my appreciation to you, I invite you, along with whatever comment you were going to leave, go ahead and leave me your favorite waffle topping in the comments, and I'm going to pick 3 random winners for waffles on me, wherever you choose. Now I'll go first. I don't eat waffles a lot because I don't really like sweets. I prefer something salty. So my favorite waffle topping is actually spicy fried chicken, which unfortunately I couldn't get today. So we're going with just a lot of butter and maple syrup on top, and of course a glass of milk on the side. The episode begin right where the last episode left off. We begin with Mark and Ragabe discussing his vision, what he saw as he was transported into the halls of Lumen and saw Gemma for the first time. Now Mark's grief and his face is just so real here, and I haven't given Ragabe enough emotional credit in the past. I'm still very suspicious of her, but it seemed like she was visibly moved and touched by Mark's experience as well. I don't know if it was the light. Ragabe says she doesn't know why, but all she knows is that Gemma is essential. Mark talks about bargaining, which is one of the stages of grief. He says that when you lose someone, you go back through what you would have done differently, listened more, drank less. My question here is this innocent, which it very well could be because this is a very real reaction stage of grief, or does this align with some of the theories that Mark really wasn't a good husband or a good guy, that he did have a huge drinking problem before Gemma died? Now we see a lot of checkered pasts or challenges in the people who decide to get severed. We don't really know a lot about Irving's past, but we see from this episode that Bert also was a bad guy or a scoundrel or a sinner. Dylan too seems to be very irresponsible with money, kind of a loser, not providing for his family. And now while that doesn't make someone inherently bad, it makes you wonder, is Lumen taking these labeled losers of society, bad people of society, addicts, scoundrels, deadbeats, to try to purify them, cleanse them with the healing power of Lumen water? We then go back to the walls of Lumen where we see a less cranky Mark, Dylan, and Helly discussing the note that Dylan found in the Hang In There poster. Because Helly hasn't been around as long to have the wedge driven between them, she is eager to take action ASAP. She's like, let's go. The other two are a little bit hesitant. Dylan doesn't want to get in trouble. Mark, meanwhile, is more focused on being hungry and unsure because he is still a little bit betrayed and off-put by what happened at the Ortbo. Helly asked, did everybody get their balls severed this morning in the elevator? Which it's just really great to have Helly back. Helena tries to be humorous, but she just doesn't. It just doesn't work for her. As Mark is searching in the fridge, now we get more food imagery in this episode than in any other episode of Severance before. Mark looks in the fridge to see these cartons and sack lunches for the Lumen employees, and then he starts to see flashes into his own fridge. We know it's his own fridge because 1, it doesn't look like there's much food in there. There's definitely alcohol in there, and then the weird egg drop soup wellness shots that he's been taking for his reintegration. We didn't get much Milch in this episode, but what we did see was very integral to his character arc. He confronts Miss Wong to let her know that he is still in charge, and he uses a lot of big words here, I think on purpose, to be like, I am the boss. I am in charge of you passing this fellowship. It is up to me to say whether or not you are wintertime material, which is kind of another check mark in the Lumen controls weather, land of perpetual winter theory that I've had that not a lot of people seem to be on board with. It makes me wonder what sort of fellowship is employing young girls as full-time people. If Miss Wong is indeed severed, she's a more advanced severed as an innie. Later we see her talking about a deviated septum, and Mark doesn't know what that is. So either she's a severed innie who studied like paramedic medicine, or she is a non-severed individual. Either way, child labor laws, what's going on in Kier PE? Could she be a member of the Kier School for Girls, much like Harmony Cobell? Maybe it's an orphanage. Maybe Harmony Cobell was orphaned and then went to stay at this Kier school for girls where she became indoctrinated, and maybe she too had an early in her life fellowship that caused her to be such an ardent believer of Lumen. Milch's repentance is to put paper clips on the right way until his hands shake. This sort of atonement is not unlike what he requires the innies to do by reciting that atonement. My question is this really the best use of his time? I mean, we have innies running around like crazy people, fornicating in spare rooms, chasing down corridors, and hugging and making out with their outie counterparts. Like, where is the law and order that you promised, Milchik? When Milchik confronts the idea of using big words, he repeats these phrases in the mirror. First, it's what he said to Miss Wong: you must eradicate from yourself this childish folly. He then says, you must grow up, grow up, grow up, grow. And this felt like some turning point for Milchik. We're seeing more and more vulnerability, more heightened emotion from him. And I almost had this feeling that he was speaking to himself, like maybe his father or some other figure in his life had spoken to him. Meanwhile, we check in on Innie, Dylan, and Gretchen. Now, I had a live with pre-show predictions, and while there was a lot I did not see coming, I did see Dylan and Gretchen meeting up once again. She mentions his phases and hobbies, clearly expensive things that he invests in, probably to find his purpose. It seems like scuba diving, woodworking, beer making in the garage are all kind of things that you'd have to purchase, either classes or supplies or something. And it seems like outie Dylan doesn't really stick with these things, which probably costs the family a lot of money. She wonders if he's unhappy on the outside. Innie Dylan is just full of joy, cheesing. He's so happy. He's like, no, I'm sure I'm happy. All I want to do is stare at your pretty face and hear about our kids. Like, I love you. He wants to try hugging again, and that turns into a kiss. When we check in with outie Dylan, we see that he's really gung-ho about buying a car. He kind of tries to placate Gretchen by saying, it's okay, you know, they'll offer me a really good deal. They're practically giving me money, which, girl math, shows that Dylan is not great with money. The crazy thing here is that Gretchen lies about seeing Innie Dylan. She says that Lumen canceled their meeting. I don't know about you guys, but is hooking up with your Innie husband cheating? The whole way she talks about it is very much like a spouse or partner trying to hide something. What will this mean moving forward? Now let's get to one of the things I did not have on my bingo card in this episode, which was Mark and Helly sharing vessels. Now, Mark is considerably less callous towards her. He's way more apologetic towards her experience versus just being angry at her for something that she, Helly, didn't do.
I could do that math. How many we share vessels?
I find it very interesting that he used the word "we shared vessels." We know that the innies know things, like they clearly know what sex is, they know what some things are, but then they are like blank slates in other areas. The word vessel is really interesting here. When I looked up the dictionary definition of vessel, I got a ship or boat, which is a throwback to the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in the last episode. I also got a hollow container, something that you fill with something. Now, I'm not really here to teach you guys about basic anatomy. That's kind of Django's job here. Between a man and a woman, only one is really the receiving vessel. One is more the giving vessel. So even if you were to make the case that one party does have a vessel, now, unless he means vessels like their bodies are vessels and they shared their bodies. And if this is the meaning, this is even more interesting, because if you call a person a vessel, this has a religious connotation as well, as though you are there to be used for some purpose, either for God or for something else, which is pretty much what the innie's whole existence is. I also didn't miss the similarity in the word vestal. Now, we talked about vestal as one of Dr. Rickon Laszlo Hale, PhD's U-types in the UUR. And this was basically the most innocent, the most blank slate, almost like the most vessel-like type, where you don't know much. You don't have that knowledge of culture or history. You're there to be kind of filled. Rickon even says this is his favorite type of person. Now, we see that most people, both the innies and the people on the outside world, are these vessels. They don't know shit about shit. What do you guys think of that word? Where did they hear that, first of all? Helly is going through it. I think she feels confused, betrayed, violated. Then she does what good old Helly always does, which is she takes action. She makes the first move and she basically says to Mark, I don't want to hear about her experience. I want one of my own. Let's go. And both their walk in in, and then their walk of shame out was hilarious to me. Creators of the show have said that season 1 was kind of like childhood and season 2 is like adolescence. And you really see last episode was like the angst of the adolescent, Mark's angst, Dylan's angst, Helly's confusion, her protest. This episode is really that adolescent horniness, those urges, those attractions. Shag me once, shame on you. Shag me twice, there's a baby. And is this like Chekhov's baby? Can we really have 2 sessions of unprotected sex with no baby involved? Now, it always seems like these sexual moments bring out a little bit of heightened feeling and bring Mark's reintegration to the surface. As they're walking down the hallway, he gets a nosebleed, which is a sign of reintegration sickness. Then they go to see Miss Wong. This girl really has many talents. She's aware of medicine. She does her corporate duties. She plays the theremin. I find it interesting that she asks if Mark has any other side effects, such as auras or hallucinations. Now, normally, if you have a nosebleed, you wouldn't really think to ask someone if having a hallucination or aura is a side effect. You might ask, do you have a headache? Are you feeling dizzy? Are they aware of symptoms of reintegration sickness? Because in season 1, the board seems resolutely opposed to it even being possible. Or do innies frequently have hallucinations and auras? Now, Mark starts to flash in and out of Lumen in the basement with Ragabe. Now, she starts asking him, where are you, Mark? Where are you? And the first thing she says is, do you remember a black hallway? Now, I'm pretty sure this is the first time she's ever mentioned a black hallway. Is she asking him if he sees that exports hallway? And where did this come into play? Because I don't think Mark has had any flashbacks of this, and even any Mark hasn't really seen that black hallway. Is Ragabe just trying to use Mark to find out herself what's in the exports hall? Mark asks what time is it, which interesting. Ragabe says that they need to try other measures. They need to potentially flood the chip. Doing these more drastic measures could of course cause a brain hemorrhage. Mark is more focused on his appetite once more and kind of shoves her off and leaves. Now let's get to one of the other key pillars of this episode, which is Irving and Bert. Last episode, I was hopeful and jolly that there would just be some happiness, some love, some warm and fuzzies. The meeting between Bert, Irving, and Fields feels way more sinister than that. Even despite Bert's scoundrel, treacherous past, I am getting a weird vibe from both him and Fields for different reasons. Start with Irving scratching off the price tag on a wine bottle. Remember that Bert said he and Fields like expensive wine. Obviously, this is kind of a courteous, well-mannered thing to do, but we wonder also maybe Irving can't afford these expensive bottles and he's trying to let it not show that he bought the $2 chuck from Trader Joe's. Their house is very odd. There's some weird art, almost looking like a clown doctor, as well as about 1 billion pepper shakers. Now, I don't know if they just really need a lot of pepper or cumin for their ham. Field and Bert call each other Attila. It used to be Hun. Now, Attila was a barbarian ruler, one of the most successful and notorious barbarian rulers of all time. Later on, as they're explaining this backstory, Fields asks Irving, do you know history? Like, not do you know Attila, do you know history? And this was super interesting to me because if we've noticed anything, it's that there is a lack of knowledge about history in the outside world. As you recall, Mark at the no dinner party basically blew Rickon's friends' mind that World War I was not called World War I until World War II. It was called the Great War because they weren't anticipating another war. In Rickon's book, he mentions that the Vestal may not know who Mozart is. In Rickon's book, we also see him mess up historical facts and figures and people all the time. Asking someone, do you know history, makes it seem like at some point in Cure PE, they've just stopped teaching history, and maybe people of either a certain age or a certain interest actually go to learn that history. All of the historical examples used, World War I, Attila the Hun, Mozart, everybody watching this knows who they are. You might not know the particulars, you might not know the exact years, you might have dozed in and out of history class, but I'm pretty sure you could tell me Attila the Hun was a fierce ruler in a general area at a general time period. You could tell me a bit about World War I. You could probably tell me that Mozart was a musician. I think this is really this theory that there might be previous innies on the outside who don't know shit about shit. Fields also calls Bert a Philistine, which is kind of a derogatory term of someone someone who lacks culture and sophistication in art, which seems quite the opposite to Bert, who seemed to have a penchant for nice art, discussion, thoughtful language, etc. Irving asks why Bert became severed, and he says it was due to religion. In his younger days, Bert had been a scoundrel, and Fields even says that's putting it mildly. They went to a Lutheran service where the pastor, almost like he heard their conversation, talked about how the innies had souls and they would be judged as individual people. Fields had the bright idea that maybe severing your brain could ensure that at least part of Bert would be able to join him in heaven. Now, this is all very, very strange and sus to me. I get really weird vibes from Fields. I can't totally put my finger on it. He says, I promise we're not zealots, like we're not religious zealots. Also, if you truly are a Christian, there's a pretty clear way you can get to heaven, and that's repenting for your sins and doing better and praying for forgiveness. Isn't that why Jesus Christ himself died on the cross? What did you do to be past the point of no salvation? When I hear scoundrel and when I see Bert's actions, I get this idea that he is a philanderer, he commits adultery, and it seems like Fields' hope that he would be this divine angel on the inside didn't necessarily come through. While Irving is at Bert's, Drummond breaks into his place. Was the plan here to bring Irving away? I think maybe either Bert is swayed and is working for Lumen, or Fields somehow works for Lumen and that's why he convinced his husband to get severed. I think this was a lure him away so that Drummond could break into his house. Drummond seems to know exactly where his hidden chest is. We see his names of severed employees, someone who may have gotten severed post a car accident. There's two different Dylans with two different last names that start with a G. The earliest severed date we see is 2007, which more on that later. Irving has also underlined random parts of their names, but we don't really know what that means. Meanwhile, at Bert and Fields, they discuss that they had started calling each other Attila 10 years ago. Fields corrects him by saying it was 20 years ago because they were having drinks with his Lumen partner. Seeing that there is this kind of pattern here, he's had several partners at Lumen, so maybe his serial cheating is happening on the outside and the inside. Also, Lumen partner could mean that maybe Bert worked for Lumen on the outside as well before he got severed. This misunderstanding of time is very important here. Bert said it was 10 years ago. Irving clarifies that the first severed office opened 12 years ago. Now, if the first severed person on Bert's list was in 2007, this would put the current year at 2019. This timeline does not work necessarily with the Lexington letter. We know that Peg Kincaid was a bus driver and that she worked at Lumen for 2 years post bus driving and before the Dorner truck explosion. We also know that Peg Kincaid's nickname was Baby Driver because of the movie, which came out in 2017. So let's say she got the nickname in 2017. Let's say she started working at Lumen in 2017. She worked there for 2 years before her innie started writing her letters and around the time of the truck explosion. That's 2019. We know that from Rickon's book. Rickon, Devin, Gemma, and Mark were on a walk 1 year after the Dorner truck explosion. So if the Dorner truck explosion happened in 2019, they were on a walk in 2020. That would mean that a year and a half later was Gemma's funeral. So that would be 2021, 2022 at some point, which is when Mark got severed. And Mark has been severed for about 2 years. There is a lack of about 4 years. It is absolutely not coincidental. There is no reason why the writers of the Lexington letter and Rickon's book would be pointing out these years in exactly referencing pop culture moments if this wasn't important. Fields then mentions having unprotected sex at work and that innies deserve love too. So we see these flashes between him being very angry to him being like, I'm happy it happened. What's yours is mine. I can't get a good read on Fields. You guys think, let me know below in the comments. Bert apologizes for Fields drinking too much and getting fuzzy and says that he'd like to do it again sometime with Irving, either with Fields or maybe even without Fields. At the very least, Bert is a cheater and he's really hungry for Irving. At the very most, I think there might be something sinister that's connected to Lumen where they are now trying to control their employees with some sort of sexual element as well well. We saw this with Helena and Mark. Now let's talk about Mark and Helena at the diner. This man is starving. He's scarfing down Chinese food like it's his job. Helena walks in and we see for the second time in one episode that someone from Lumen knows where the outside characters are. Helena tries to awkwardly flirt with him, and we talked about this on my live yesterday that maybe Helena is jealous of Helly, that she could kind of get this guy on her own. Helena does mention you'd be the first when talking about taking Mark home to her dad. That could mean you'd be the first severed employee that's come home to meet dad, or you'd be the first boyfriend. It's all very weird flirting here, and she just doesn't have the same charm and fluidity in her demeanor as Helly. And I think maybe she knows that. Maybe she's trying to see if she could seduce Mark on her own as Helena. At some point she says, Mark, I'm like the head of the company. And let me tell you, having worked with a lot of clients in my day job, which unfortunately isn't YouTube, having worked with a lot of founders of companies, a lot of people with big egos, a lot of people both smart and not, anytime somebody calls themselves a visionary or calls themselves a genius or tells you how much money they have or tells you I'm like the head of a company, that should be a clear red flag that they are compensating for something and that they are not who they say they are. Even though she is figuratively the head of the company, we see that Drummond, her father, Natalie get to tell her what to do all the time. She seems very curious about the quote systemic error from the other night. Hasn't it been like a week at this point? She then calls Gemma Hannah. Now, what do you guys think? Do you think that she genuinely doesn't pay attention to this shit and doesn't care and is like, yeah, whatever, this dead girl that we reanimated and this poor man with his grief, Hannah, what the fuck's her name? Or do you think she's trying to make it seem like she doesn't know enough about Mark? I don't really think it's that. I think it's the first one because she's obviously like, yeah, I know a car crash killed your wife. She was so young, which like, they're not that young. So that was interesting. I mean, yes, she's young compared to what age people should die. The messing up of her name wasn't deliberate. It truly was accidental because she doesn't know shit about shit. As Mark gets up, he stares at Helena and the sound changes, the viewpoint changes, and I think he has some sort of flashback or memory and we just don't see what it is. He then goes into Regabe, tells her he's sorry for being a dick and wants to continue with the process. I don't think I have to tell you what happens next. Using the hole in his head where they put the severance chip, she opens it back up to shoot some weird liquid in to quote, flood the chip. I don't think she's done this before. I do not think she got here with PD. She looks hella nervous. She looks very unsure, not only because that needle is long. Now, right away, Mark starts to see all these things come together. We get this very strange quick flash of Gemma, who's not in a Miss Casey outfit. She's also wearing purple, which is a color of the red of the outside world and the blue of the inside world coming together. And then I love how he kind of goes back and goes, what the fuck? She's like, you're not supposed to move like that. Then Devin knocks on the door and Mark says he has to answer it. Regabe wants him to keep still. He goes and runs up to answer her. She even mentions that rich lady from baby camp that she kind of had a crush on, that senator's wife who potentially got severed just for her pregnancy. So I think this is a hint that Devin will maybe start her own investigation, doing what she can, maybe going after her to try to find non-worker severed people just to see how pervasive this issue is. Mark says, what is that smell? And I looked up phantom smells and it seems like they can accompany not only strokes but frontal lobe damage and head trauma. So this is a bit concerning for what's going on in Mark's head. And they do a great job of making our boy look very, very unwell. We end here with Mark falling on the ground, seizing and having some sort of foam coming out of his mouth. Regabe runs up the stairs and Devin yells, who the fuck are you? We have to hope that because Mark is the main character of the show that he'll be okay, but I think he is walking a fine line between the point of no return. I'm wondering if Mark is going to get the answers but be so damaged at some point that there is just no going back. There's no happy ending. At the beginning, Regabe said, you know, you guys can be together again on the outside, and part of me is like, bitch, do you even think that's true? Is that even a possibility at this point? So that's all I have for you today. What did you think of the episode? I loved it. Of course, I was on the edge of my seat. One person we did not see at all was our girl Kobelvig. I think there's there's some hint that we might get a flashback episode next episode, which with much more of her life. We need our Cobelvig back. This week I did a live pregame, my first live, where we discussed theories and predictions. I'm thinking about doing that again next week. I'll try to come out with a midweek theory video, so make sure you drop your theories below. I have a few that I want to talk about that are both related and unrelated to this. Anyway, I also have a White Lotus episode coming out this weekend, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, like, and don't forget to comment both what you thought about the episode, but your favorite waffle topping. I'll be picking the winners on, let's say, Monday, so that you can have your waffle by Wednesday. All right, hope you guys have a great weekend. Make sure you work hard and don't get severed. Say bye to Django. Bye, 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 bye. Bye.